The table was already set when I walked into my father's dining room that evening. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread filled the air, a reminder of the comfort that had once defined our family dinners. I was 32, the youngest daughter, and though I had my own small apartment across town, I came back here every Sunday to share a meal with my father. He was 70 now, a retired carpenter, quiet and steady. His silence at these dinners often spoke louder than any of our words. I pulled out my chair and placed my hands on the table, noticing the subtle divisions that had grown with time. Family meals revealed the hierarchy in ways nothing else could. Who got listened to, who got brushed aside, who carried weight, and who was disregarded. There was an old saying I'd heard at work once: you can tell a lot about a family by who gets talked over at the table. Tonight, I could feel that truth hovering before a word was even spoken. Karen, my sister-in-law, wasn't there yet. She was never on time. She liked the dramatic entrance. And as always, my father said nothing about her lateness. He simply filled his glass of water and settled into his chair, as though waiting for the storm to arrive. When Karen finally walked in, the room shifted. She wore a fitted black dress that screamed price tag, her diamond earrings catching the light. Everyone looked up. My cousins greeted her with warmth that felt rehearsed, a chorus of admiration. "Karen, you look amazing," one of them said, leaning forward as though she were a celebrity. I sat quietly, folding my napkin, watching the way the energy bent toward her. Karen thrived on attention, and she knew exactly how to pull it in. She tossed her hair back, kissed cheeks, and announced, "I've just been on calls all day about the contract in New York, $15 million. That's not just a deal, that's history." The table hummed with admiration. Her friends, who had tagged along for the dinner, chimed in at the right moments, clapping softly, laughing too loudly. They reinforced her self-portrait as the achiever, the one worth celebrating. Then, like clockwork, she pivoted her attention to me. "Of course," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Bella wouldn't know what it means to negotiate under pressure. She's a teacher, a good one, I'm sure, but it's not exactly the same league." Her words weren't harsh, but they landed with precision. The room chuckled uncomfortably, some eyes darting toward me and then away. My father kept his eyes fixed on his plate. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to sit still. I listened. I observed. Every word she spoke was a thread weaving her illusion of superiority. Karen leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine like a queen, as if the rest of us existed only to confirm her throne. The sting of her jab was sharp, but I refused to give her the reaction she wanted. I held her gaze for a moment, let the silence stretch, then looked away as though her words meant less than the salt shaker in front of me. Dinner carried on, plates being passed, forks clinking, and yet her needling didn't stop. When the laughter died down, she sharpened her smile and said, "Honestly, Bella has always been such a helper in this family. She runs errands, tutors the kids, keeps everything in line. Every family needs someone to fill that role." The word helper sliced clean through me. It wasn't a compliment, it was a demotion. I glanced around the table. Some laughed, others avoided my eyes. My father's silence hung heavy in the room. He didn't defend me, but I saw regret etched across his face. His hands tightened slightly around his fork, but still, no words. Inside, I analyzed the moment. This wasn't about me being less successful, it was about Karen's fear. Fear that my authenticity, my refusal to chase appearances, threatened her facade. She needed me to be smaller so she could remain large, and the family, unwilling to upset the balance, allowed her narrative to stand. In America, I thought to myself, respect is currency. When you strip it from someone at the dinner table, you bankrupt the bond that holds a family together. That truth pressed down on me like a weight. Karen had just spent it carelessly. But instead of arguing, I lifted my glass of water, took a slow sip, and placed it back down with deliberate calm. I sat straighter in my chair, folded my hands, and looked directly at her. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. For a split second, her confident grin faltered. It was quick, almost unnoticeable, but I caught it. My silence, sharper than any retort, shifted the current. I thought of Eleanor Roosevelt's words I had once underlined in a book. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Tonight, I was not giving consent. The conversation drifted on, Karen redirecting attention to her glamorous friends and her upcoming New York trip. I kept my silence, not as a retreat but as a strategy. Every arrogant word she spoke revealed her more than it diminished me. As dessert was brought out, Karen lifted her glass and declared, "This deal will prove who really belongs in this family. Not everyone gets to play at this level." The table laughed lightly, her friends applauding her confidence. I placed my fork down, looked at her calmly, and thought, she has no idea what's coming. The morning of our departure came sooner than I expected. The air was still cool as I pulled into the airport parking lot, the faint glow of sunrise brushing the horizon. My suitcase wheels rattled against the pavement as I hurried toward the terminal, knowing Karen would already be inside, orchestrating every detail as if she were running a military operation. Sure enough, I spotted her near the entrance, standing tall in a tailored blazer, barking instructions like a self-appointed general. "Dad, make sure your ID is out before we get to security, and don't fumble for it. People are watching." Her voice was sharp, carrying across the crowd. I kept my distance, watching quietly as the others fell into line. She thrived on being seen, taking command, even when it wasn't needed. My father, patient as ever, complied with her requests without protest, though I could see the weariness in his shoulders. Karen turned her eyes on me. "Bella, don't lag behind. If you can't keep up, you'll make the whole group look disorganized." "I'm right here," I answered evenly, keeping my tone calm. No rise, no defensiveness, just clarity. She gave a tight smile. "Good. At least you can follow directions." Then, in a louder voice to the group, "I don't know what they'd do without me. These trips take planning, and not everyone's cut out for that responsibility." Relatives chuckled awkwardly. One of them muttered, "That's true, Karen. You've got the skills." They didn't mean it, but no one wanted to confront her. I stayed silent, reminding myself what I had learned long ago. Silence often exposes arrogance better than arguments ever could. We lined up at the check-in counter, the morning rush buzzing around us. Karen stepped forward first, presenting her documents with a flourish. 2 first-class tickets for me and my husband. She handed them over like she was signing a royal decree. I reached into my bag for my own ticket, economy, purchased with my modest teacher's salary. Karen turned her head slightly, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Not everyone can handle first-class comfort," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "Some of us work for it." A few relatives chuckled uncomfortably, reinforcing the divide. I looked at the thin slip of paper in my hand. To her, it was proof I didn't belong. But to me, it was just a way to reach the same destination. Airplanes don't care if you're first class or coach, I thought. They crash the same. It was a grim reminder that status is fragile, more illusion than reality. Karen, pleased with herself, clutched her boarding passes as if they were trophies. She straightened her shoulders and looked at me again. "Well, Bella, I suppose you'll be with the rest of the crowd in the back. Maybe it's where you fit best." I met her gaze and said nothing. She wanted me to flinch, to snap back so she could claim victory. Instead, I kept my composure, my silence a mirror reflecting her cruelty back at her. We moved toward the security checkpoint. Karen slowed just enough to lean toward me and hiss, "Don't stand with us when we board. Your clothes don't match the image I need to project." Her words were knives, quiet, precise, meant to cut deep without anyone else noticing. My shirt was plain, my jeans simple, but clean and appropriate. Still, in her world, appearances were currency, and I had none to spend. I took a deep breath and kept walking, refusing to let her see the sting. Around us, a few strangers noticed the tension. A woman glanced at me sympathetically, then looked away, as if she recognized the cruelty, but knew it wasn't her place to intervene. I paused, folding my boarding pass carefully, sliding it into my pocket as though sealing a promise to myself. Dignity is not negotiable. My mother's words echoed inside me. Protect it, even when others won't. Karen glanced back, expecting a retort. Instead, I stood straight, shoulders squared, and remained silent. My lack of reaction unsettled her, though she tried to mask it with another laugh for her friends. As I adjusted my bag on my shoulder, I caught a stranger's eyes, an older man in a simple suit sitting near the gate. His gaze lingered on the scene, quiet but intent, as though he saw more than what was being shown. He nodded faintly, a gesture almost imperceptible. At the time, I didn't know who he was, but the look stayed with me. Karen's voice pulled me back. "This deal will change everything for us," she boasted to her husband as they moved toward the priority boarding line. Her words were meant for the crowd, another performance to reinforce her image. I tightened my grip on my folded boarding pass, whispering inwardly, "She has no idea how right she is." The hum of the plane settled around me as we lifted off, Cincinnati shrinking into a patchwork of gray and green beneath the clouds. Karen was tucked away in first class, no doubt sipping her champagne and rehearsing her lines about the deal in New York. I walked past her seat as I boarded, her eyes sliding over me like I was invisible, then made my way down the narrow aisle until I reached my row in coach. Sliding into my seat, I pushed my carry-on under the chair in front of me, fastened the belt, and leaned toward the window. The city faded beneath us, and with it the noise of the airport, though faint laughter still drifted back from the front cabin. The space between us was more than physical. It was the kind of distance created by years of quiet cuts and small humiliations. Airplanes always did this to me, pulled memories up from places I thought I had buried. There was something about being suspended between earth and sky that made me reflective, as if I were floating not just in air, but in time. My mind wandered back to the night at dinner, the sharp edge of Karen's words still clinging like burrs to my skin. What stayed with me most wasn't what she said, but what my father didn't. I remembered the way he sat at the head of the table, his fork paused halfway to his mouth as Karen labeled me the helper of the family. The laughter of others had been soft, nervous, unsure if it was meant to be a joke. But my father's eyes, those stayed fixed on me. He hadn't spoken, not a defense, not a correction, just silence. It wasn't arrogance like Karen's silence often was. His was heavy, filled with unspoken regret. I could feel him wrestling with words he didn't dare say, as though acknowledging the truth of her cruelty would fracture something fragile in the room. Sometimes the loudest words, I thought as the plane vibrated around me, are the ones never spoken. That look had followed me here, haunting me as much as Karen's jab. It was a reminder that he saw more than he admitted, and perhaps more than he was ready to confront. I closed my eyes for a moment and let myself drift to another memory. My mother's voice, soft but firm, a voice I hadn't heard in years except in the quiet of my own thoughts. She had been frail at the end, her breath shallow, but her words steady. "Dignity is not negotiable, Bella," she had told me one night as I sat by her bed. "Even if no one defends you, defend yourself." Those words had etched themselves into me, armor I carried in silence. Whenever Karen tried to belittle me, whenever others looked away instead of standing up, it was my mother's advice that kept me upright. I smiled faintly, hearing her in my head. She was nothing like Karen. Where Karen was loud, eager to be seen, my mother's wisdom had always been quiet, rooted in substance. She taught me that resilience isn't flashy. It's lived in small choices, the kind people don't applaud because they don't notice. I thought of how many Americans carried voices like hers, echoes of parents long gone, offering guidance in moments that tested us. Even here, above the clouds, her words steadied me, made me feel less alone. Opening my eyes again, I glanced toward the curtain that separated first class from coach. Karen's laughter rose above the hum of the engines. She was probably telling her friends how appearances mattered, how image was everything. I knew better. I wasn't surviving her arrogance through passivity. I was surviving it because my mother's resilience still lived in me, a quiet inheritance that Karen could never touch. Looking down at the clouds below, I realized both my parents had shaped me in different ways. My father, too quiet, too unwilling to disturb the peace, taught me the cost of silence when it comes from fear. My mother, with her last words, gave me a compass I still followed. On this flight, I could feel both of them with me. The contrasts between them weren't a weakness, they were a lesson. Karen's attempts to erase me were really just tests. Would I let myself vanish, or would I root myself deeper in what they had left behind? The more she tries to silence me, I thought, the more I remember my mother's voice. I drew strength from that thought, letting the tension in my shoulders ease. This wasn't about enduring anymore. Something inside me was shifting, preparing for what was ahead. I wasn't going to simply take her blows quietly. I was going to choose my moments, respond strategically, and let her arrogance dig her own grave. The engines roared steady as we soared higher, the clouds parting in streaks of white. I closed my eyes once more and whispered my mother's words again, letting them settle into my chest. I knew soon Karen would cross a line she couldn't walk back from. The terminal was buzzing with the kind of energy only an early morning flight could bring. Lines of tired travelers dragging suitcases, announcements crackling over the speakers, children fussing while parents tried to keep order. Our family spilled into the stream of people, and as always, Karen took the lead like a performer stepping onto a stage. She pulled her phone from her designer bag and began talking loudly, not caring that half the terminal could hear. Yes, the New York contract. $15 million. Once it's signed, everything changes. No, I'm not nervous. This is what I was born for. Her heels clicked against the floor, each step timed to her words, as if even the sound of her walking needed to draw attention. I followed several steps behind, my own bag steady in my hand. I deliberately walked at a calm pace, choosing not to match her frantic energy. Karen glanced back, irritation flashing across her face. "Keep up, Bella." "We can't look disorganized." "I'm right here," I said evenly. She rolled her eyes and turned her attention back to her phone. The crowd around us moved naturally, but Karen seemed convinced every eye was fixed on her. The more I watched her perform, the tighter the knot in my chest grew. Something was building, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she found a way to push me aside. As we neared the gate, Karen's eyes lit up. 3 of her friends were already waiting, dressed as though they were headed for a fashion magazine shoot rather than a long flight. They waved, their smiles bright, and Karen immediately straightened, her whole body shifting into performance mode. She halted so suddenly that I nearly bumped into her suitcase. Turning sharply, she leaned close and whispered with venom, "Don't walk with us, you'll embarrass me." The words were soft, almost tender in their quietness, but they cut deeper than if she had shouted them across the terminal. My chest burned as though the oxygen had been sucked from the air. Her friends, standing just a few feet away, exchanged quick smirks. They pretended to look at their phones, but I saw the glint in their eyes. They'd heard. They were entertained. Karen's lips twisted into a smile as she turned back to them, her voice suddenly bright again. "Oh, I'm so glad you made it. We're going to have the best time in New York." I stood still for a moment, her words echoing inside me. Respect isn't lost in storms, it's stolen in whispers, and she had just stolen mine. But I refused to let her see me break. Instead of raising my voice, instead of giving her the fight she was waiting for, I stopped in my tracks and gripped the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles ached. Then I lifted my head and met her gaze. I didn't say a word. I gave her a calm nod, nothing more. The weight of silence filled the space between us. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat, but outwardly I was composed. My choice was intentional. In America, silence can speak louder than words, and I was letting mine roar. Karen blinked, caught off guard. She had expected me to argue, to create a scene she could later twist into a story about my instability. Instead, I gave her nothing to work with. For just a second, her smile faltered. Around us, a few strangers noticed. A man waiting with his daughter raised his eyebrows. A woman in line for coffee shook her head with quiet disapproval. They hadn't heard every word, but they had seen enough. And then there was another man, older, dressed simply in a dark suit, sitting with a carry-on beside him. His eyes were fixed on us, intent and assessing. I didn't know it then, but he was watching more closely than anyone else. Karen turned back to her friends and let out a nervous laugh. "She doesn't understand appearances," she said, jerking her head in my direction. Her tone was dismissive, meant to confirm her superiority. The sting was sharp, but I let my mother's words surface again. Dignity is not negotiable. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and stepped aside. Karen swept forward with her friends, her laughter bouncing off the walls of the terminal. I stayed behind, breathing evenly, refusing to shrink. My silence had become rebellion, and though she thought she had managed me, the truth was the opposite. She was marching ahead, unaware that every step she took only revealed more of who she really was. I knew in that moment this wasn't just humiliation, it was the turning point. Karen's laughter echoed down the wide terminal as she strode ahead with her friends, their heels striking the tiled floor in perfect rhythm. She carried herself as if cameras were trained on her every move. I lagged a few steps behind, not because I couldn't keep up, but because I refused to rush for the sake of her performance. At my side rolled the oversized suitcase she had insisted I take earlier. The bag was nearly bursting, heavy with her clothes, shoes, and whatever else she couldn't leave behind. With each step, the weight pulled harder on my arm. It wasn't just luggage, it felt like I was dragging her ego, her need for validation, her endless demands. The handle dug into my palm, and though my chest burned with anger, I kept my pace calm, deliberate. Sometimes carrying what isn't yours becomes the heaviest burden, I thought. And this was exactly that. We neared the line for security. Travelers formed long snakes of people winding through metal poles, bags piled high. Karen's voice rose above the din as she turned to her friends. Once this deal is signed, no one will doubt me again. They'll see who the real power in this family is. I swallowed hard but said nothing. My silence had become a shield, even if inside I was fighting to stay composed. At the edge of the security line, the suitcase slipped from my hand. The release was deliberate, though I made it look natural. The case crashed onto the floor with a loud thud, startling those nearby. A few heads turned. The sound cut through the terminal noise like a cymbal in a quiet symphony. Karen spun around, her eyes flashing. Annoyance fought with shock in her expression. "What on earth, Bella? You can't even hold on to one bag?" I straightened, my hands free now, and met her glare calmly. "It's heavy," I said simply, my tone flat but steady. I offered no apology. Her friends leaned closer to her, their laughter awkward and thin. One whispered, "That was loud." Another stifled a giggle, though it was more nervous than amused. I didn't pick the suitcase back up. I stood straighter, spine aligned, head lifted. My silence filled the space between us like an immovable wall. Karen's cheeks flushed. She jabbed a finger toward the bag. "Pick it up. People are staring. Do you want to make us look ridiculous?" I tilted my head slightly, not breaking eye contact. "If it's so important, you should carry it." Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. Her friends glanced around, sensing the shift in the crowd. The attention, once so comfortable for Karen, now felt dangerous. A man behind us frowned, shaking his head at her tone. A woman whispered something to her partner, her eyes fixed on Karen with open disapproval. The humiliation was no longer mine, it was hers. My father's eyes flashed in my mind, the regret in his silence at dinner. But unlike him, I wasn't staying silent out of fear. My silence was intentional. Mine had purpose. Karen bent to grab the handle, her movements jerky. The suitcase tipped and wobbled as she yanked it upright, the effort straining her polished image. She hissed, "This is exactly why you shouldn't be seen with us. You can't manage even the simplest things." Her friends forced out thin chuckles, but their glances betrayed them. They were uncomfortable now, caught in the tension, sensing her cruelty for what it was. I didn't move. My voice stayed in my chest, but my message was clear. The louder she got, the more she exposed herself. I thought of my mother's words once more. Dignity is not negotiable. And in that moment, I understood that silence wasn't just survival, it was strategy. Give someone enough rope, I reminded myself, and they'll hang themselves. I took one deliberate step back, leaving the suitcase firmly in Karen's grip. She stood red-faced, her manicured fingers wrapped tightly around the handle, dragging it forward with awkward jerks. I followed at a distance now, my pace calm, my breathing even. Each step I took felt lighter than the last, as though by dropping her weight I had dropped more than a bag. I had dropped years of being her invisible carrier. Ahead, Karen's back was stiff, her movements harsher. Her friends whispered to one another, glancing back at me with something between curiosity and respect. They had seen the fracture, and I knew this was just the beginning, the first crack in her perfect image, the first sign of collapse she wouldn't be able to hide. The terminal's chaos spilled behind me as I followed Karen and her entourage into the VIP lounge. She presented her first-class pass with a flick of her wrist, smiling broadly at the receptionist. Her voice was pitched just high enough to carry, "First class, of course. My husband and I never travel any other way." I reached into my purse and pulled out my father's credit card guest pass. The receptionist scanned it, nodded politely, and handed me the small entry ticket. Karen's head snapped back as she noticed. For a moment, her carefully held smile cracked, annoyance flashing across her face. "You got in here with that?" she whispered sharply, leaning toward her friends. "Even coach passengers can sneak into first-class lounges now. What's the point of exclusivity?" Her friends giggled, one of them murmuring, "Well, it's not like she belongs here." I said nothing. Instead, I chose a seat away from their cluster, placing my bag beside me and watching silently. The leather chair felt cool beneath me, a quiet corner far from her performance. Karen tossed her hair, glancing my way once more as if making sure her words had landed. They had, but not in the way she imagined. Across the lounge, a man in a plain navy suit sipped his coffee, eyes following the scene. His clothes were simple, his presence quiet, but there was something about the way he studied the room. While others scrolled on their phones or buried themselves in newspapers, he watched. He saw Karen's laughter, saw my composure, and tilted his head as though measuring something invisible. Karen grew louder, her voice carrying over the clink of glasses and hushed conversations. "Once this New York deal is finalized, it will change everything. $15 million isn't just a contract, it's a legacy. I've worked too hard to let anyone ruin that image." She said the last word with a sharp glance in my direction, as if my mere presence threatened her empire. I folded my hands in my lap, steady, unmoved. You learn more about people by watching how they treat those they think don't matter, I thought. And clearly, so did the man in the navy suit. After a few minutes, he rose from his seat, carrying his coffee, and crossed the lounge. He stopped near me, gesturing politely to the empty chair across from mine. "Rough day?" he asked, his tone casual. I looked up, forcing a faint smile. "Not rough," I replied. "Just a reminder. Some of us prefer building things that last, not just things that shine." His eyebrows lifted slightly, surprised by my answer. He leaned back in the chair, considering me with more interest. His eyes were calm, but sharp, as though he wasn't used to hearing words like that in places like this. Karen, overhearing, rolled her eyes dramatically. She whispered to her friends, "See? Always trying to sound deep, as if quoting wisdom makes her relevant." Her friends chuckled on cue, but their laughter fell flat. The man across from me didn't laugh. He nodded once, as though my words carried weight he understood. Karen noticed. Her voice grew louder again, desperate to reclaim the spotlight. "Image is everything," she declared. "If you don't control how the world sees you, you've already lost. That's why I always travel with the right people, the right brands, the right look." She lifted her designer purse slightly, as if it were proof of her argument. I thought quietly, if substance were measured in handbags, she'd own the world. But if it's measured in integrity, she'd have nothing. The man in the navy suit glanced toward her briefly, his expression unchanged, then turned back to me. The contrast was sharp, her words falling flat, mine drawing his attention without effort. Karen caught his lack of enthusiasm. I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with another boast. "We're meeting with executives in Manhattan tomorrow. They know the value of a polished image." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence was steady, deliberate, a counterpoint to her noise. The lounge announcement came over the speakers. "First-class passengers on Flight 214 to New York, please proceed to boarding." Karen rose quickly, sweeping her bags into her arms with the practiced grace of someone stepping onto a runway. "Let's go," she said to her friends. "We can't keep the world waiting." I stayed seated a moment longer, gathering my things slowly. As I stood, the man in the navy suit lingered by my chair. He gave me a small, respectful nod, silent but unmistakably acknowledging me. I returned the nod, though I didn't yet understand the significance. The lounge had quieted into the muffled sounds of low conversations, the shuffle of papers, and the faint clink of glasses. Yet Karen's voice cut through all of it like a brass trumpet. She leaned forward in her seat, her friends encircling her as if she were giving a lecture. 15 million, she said, her voice loud enough for half the room to hear. Do you understand what that means? It means influence. It means the right people finally recognizing me for who I am. She glanced around, making sure strangers nearby were listening. One of her friends laughed too loudly. Karen, you always know the right people. That's why no one else can do what you do. Karen beamed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Exactly. Connections are everything. You can't buy them, you can't fake them. You either belong or you don't. Her eyes flicked toward me. The implication was clear. I sat quietly, sipping my water. My silence wasn't weakness. It was intentional. Still, her remark stung because of how casually she threw it out, as if dismissing me cost her nothing. Then she sharpened the edge. Some people, she said with a little smirk, will never understand success. They're just ordinary. Her friends laughed again. One leaned over to the other, whispering loudly enough for me to hear. At least she tries. A wave of heat rose in my chest, but I pressed my palms against my knees and steadied my breath. My mother's words floated back to me. Dignity is not negotiable. I held on to that, letting Karen's arrogance echo without feeding it. Her smile wavered for just a fraction of a second. My calm was stealing her stage, but Karen wasn't done. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and held it high. Ladies, let's show the world what power looks like. They leaned in, their smiles wide and practiced. Karen tilted the camera just so, capturing herself in the center. Power women don't waste time with the weak, she declared as she hit record. The words slapped the air. She posted the video instantly to her story, smirking in triumph as if she had just secured the deal right there in the lounge. But what she hadn't noticed was the background. Her phone had picked up more than her polished words. The sneer in her tone, the jab at me, the way her friends snickered. It was all faintly audible. Minutes later, I saw the ripple. People around us began checking their phones. A young woman in a business suit gasped softly. A man across the lounge turned his screen to his companion, both frowning as they read. Karen, oblivious, scrolled through the first wave of comments. At first she smiled, but then her face changed. What? She whispered. Her thumb scrolled faster. No, that's not right. Her friends leaned in, curious. One of them asked, "What are they saying?" Karen's lips tightened. They don't get it. They're calling me cruel? Her friend frowned. Let me see. She reached for the phone, but Karen jerked it back. They're saying I'm shallow, vindictive. She laughed nervously, trying to shake it off. They don't understand high-level business. Americans love to tear down successful women. That's all this is. But the comments kept pouring in. Words like heartless, toxic, and fake flooded the screen. Strangers in the lounge whispered, heads turning. The admiration Karen craved so desperately had flipped in minutes. I stayed quiet, observing. My silence was a mirror again, forcing her to look at herself. I didn't need to say a word. The room was already judging. Karen clutched her phone tighter, muttering under her breath. This is ridiculous. They're just jealous. Her hands shook slightly, betraying the calm mask she tried to wear. America loves ambition, I thought, but it despises cruelty. Her friends shifted uncomfortably. The one closest to her finally said, Karen, maybe just delete it. Karen's eyes blazed. No, I won't let them twist this. I control the narrative. But her voice cracked, betraying the tremor underneath. Around us, whispers grew louder. A man leaned over to his wife and muttered, "She's the one from that post. I just saw it." The wife shook her head. "What a shame." Karen's mask slipped again. She fumbled with her phone, scrolling furiously, her jaw tight. Her muttering grew faster, angry, panicked. "They don't know me. They don't know what it takes. This isn't how it's supposed to go." I sat still, watching. This was only the beginning of her unraveling. The ride from the airport into Manhattan was a blur of traffic horns and neon reflections bouncing off glass towers. Karen and her friends chatted with excitement in the car, their voices rising every time they spoke about the deal. 15 million, Bella, Karen repeated, as though I hadn't heard it enough already. "Do you even know how many zeros that is? This contract will seal everything I've worked for." I stared out the window, letting her words wash over me. The city's skyline unfolded before us, steel and ambition stacked high, a place where people came to prove themselves. For Karen, it was a stage. For me, it was just another backdrop to her performance. By the time we arrived at the luxury hotel, she was vibrating with energy. The lobby glittered with marble floors and chandeliers, executives in tailored suits moving with calculated purpose. Karen adjusted her jacket, smoothed her hair, and whispered lines to herself as though rehearsing a speech. I trailed behind, unnoticed, my presence muted on purpose. She mistook the glances of strangers as admiration, lifting her chin higher with every step. "Look at the way they see me," she said to one of her friends. "They know I'm the one in charge." I didn't respond, but inside, I knew a shift was coming. As we approached the lounge, Karen's face brightened for a moment, then faltered. Standing near the entrance, calm and composed, was the man in the navy suit, the same man from the airport lounge, the same man who had watched everything. Her confident stride faltered, her smile tightened. Her friends glanced at one another nervously, sensing the crack. Karen quickly recovered, pasting on her brightest grin. "Mr. Redmond, what an honor to see you here." His gaze was steady, unreadable, as he extended his hand. "Karen." She seized it eagerly, her laughter too quick. "I've been looking forward to this moment. We have so much to discuss." His grip was polite but distant, his hand already withdrawing. Then he turned to me. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, recognition passed between us. He extended his hand again, firm, deliberate, the kind of handshake that acknowledged presence, not performance. I accepted it quietly, nodding with respect. I didn't need to say much. The gesture spoke louder than words. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Karen stiffen. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, realizing the imbalance. Her handshake had been dismissed. Mine had been affirmed. Karen, desperate to reclaim control, launched into a rapid-fire stream of words. "I've been in talks with top-level executives all week. They're eager to close this deal. 15 million isn't just a number. It's validation of everything I've built. I have the connections, the network, the image. And of course," she gestured vaguely toward me, "I've brought along support, though some people won't understand the stakes at play." Her words landed heavy, meant to reduce me, to remind everyone of my place, but I remained silent. My lack of reaction made her words echo louder. Her need to diminish me revealed more about her than it did about me. Mr. Redmond's expression didn't change. He listened, but not with the admiration Karen expected. His gaze was cool, appraising, as though stripping away the layers of her performance. Karen laughed nervously. "You know, image is everything. If you don't control it, you lose everything. That's why I've always invested in being seen the right way." Inside, I thought, give arrogance a stage, and it performs its own downfall. Her voice grew more frantic as she name-dropped brands, partners, executives who weren't in the room. Each word made her sound smaller, not larger. She didn't realize it, but she was unraveling in front of him. And finally, Mr. Redmond cleared his throat. The room fell silent instantly. His expression remained unreadable as he said, "We'll talk about this deal in private, after I ask a few questions first." Karen swallowed hard, panic flickering across her face. The conference room was sleek, cold, and painfully quiet as we entered. Karen walked in first, her heels clattering across the polished floor. She had rehearsed her stride, her smile, even the tilt of her chin. Confidence radiated from her, but it felt brittle, forced. Her entourage trailed behind, murmuring compliments meant to keep her upright. At the head of the table sat Mr. Redmond, calm, steady, a folder closed neatly in front of him. He didn't stand, didn't smile, just looked up with eyes that seemed to strip away the gloss on everything around him. I slipped into a chair near the wall, intentionally out of the spotlight. Still, I saw Karen's glance flick toward me, irritation tightening her jaw. My presence unsettled her, though she wouldn't admit it. She launched into her pitch, flipping open glossy binders, handing out carefully crafted slides. Her voice rose and fell, as if she were giving a performance rather than a presentation. "This contract isn't just about money," she declared. "It's about image. It's about legacy. And I am the one who can deliver that." Mr. Redmond listened without a word, his face unreadable. The silence pressed against the room, and I watched Karen's energy shift from enthusiasm to nervous chatter. She filled the quiet with more and more words, not realizing how much power his stillness carried. When she finally stopped, waiting for applause that never came, he leaned forward slightly. His voice was calm, deliberate. "If you humiliate family in public," he said, "why should I trust you with my clients?" The words hit like a hammer. Karen froze, her rehearsed smile slipping. The air thickened. Her friends shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between her and him. "What?" she stammered, her laugh brittle. That's not what you think. It was a misunderstanding." Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. For the first time, her glossy pitch seemed meaningless, paper-thin. Mr. Redmond reached for the folder before him and opened it with measured precision. "My assistant did some research," he said. He slid a few documents across the table. "I see a pattern: mistreating staff, lawsuits quietly settled, resumes inflated with experiences you never had." Karen's face drained of color. She tried to pivot, words tumbling over themselves. "Every successful woman has enemies. People get jealous. They make things up." His reply was sharp, yet calm. "Jealousy doesn't file legal complaints." Her breath caught. The binders she had passed out suddenly looked absurd, flimsy against the weight of what was in his folder. I sat silently, watching the unraveling I had anticipated for so long. Karen's eyes darted to her friends, pleading silently for backup. But they avoided her gaze. One studied the table, another busied herself with her phone. None of them stepped forward. Desperation twisted her face. She snapped toward me, her voice high and shrill. "You're behind this, aren't you? Always trying to ruin me." All eyes turned to me. I lifted my head, met her glare, and said nothing. My silence filled the room heavier than any words could. Mr. Redmond shook his head slowly. "No one needed to ruin you," he said evenly. "You did that yourself." The words landed like a verdict. Karen's shoulders slumped. I thought quietly, "The truth doesn't need defenders. It only needs light." Karen pressed her palms flat against the table, her voice trembling now. "You don't understand. This deal is everything. I can fix it. Just give me another chance." Mr. Redmond closed the folder firmly, the sound final. "This deal is over. But I haven't decided what comes next." Karen collapsed into her chair, trembling, her empire crumbling in front of the very people she had hoped to impress. The words still hung in the air when the CEO stood, his presence filling the room more than his voice. "This deal is over," he said with finality. There was no hesitation, no space left for interpretation. His tone was calm, but each syllable carried the weight of a gavel striking down. Karen lurched forward, her glossy presentation slides slipping from her hand onto the polished table. "Wait, please, you don't understand. I can adjust the terms. We can restructure. Just give me a minute to explain." Her voice cracked around the edges, desperation already seeping through. He didn't raise his voice, but his answer cut like steel. "I understand enough." Around the table, executives exchanged glances. A few whispered, some shook their heads. The air was thick with discomfort. Karen's carefully built persona, Her power suit, her rehearsed smile, began to unravel in real time. Her cheeks flushed a deep red as she realized no amount of glitter could hide the cracks. From my chair at the edge of the room, I stayed silent. My mother's words echoed in me. Dignity is not negotiable. This moment wasn't mine to force. It was hers to fall into. Reputation is like glass, I thought. It doesn't shatter slowly. Karen's voice rose, frantic. This is a mistake. I have jealous rivals who've been spreading lies. You can't punish me for their envy. Her pitch, once so polished, now screeched. Her shrill tone clashed against the CEO's steady composure, and everyone in the room winced at the sound. Her entourage shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One of them leaned toward another and whispered, "This isn't going to end well." Karen's chest heaved as she jabbed her finger at the table. "You're all blind. Don't you see how much value I bring?" But the more she spoke, the more her words betrayed her panic. Her arrogance, once her armor, had twisted into a cage. I sat with my hands folded, watching as her empire burned from within. Finally, she turned, eyes wild, searching for her friends. "Say something! Back me up! Tell them what I've done!" Her friends avoided her gaze. One cleared her throat, muttered, "Maybe we should give them privacy," and stood quickly, almost tripping on her own heels as she hurried toward the door. Another mumbled, "Yes, yes, maybe that's best," and followed. One by one, they slipped out, abandoning her in the very moment she needed their applause most. Her eyes widened, betrayal settling deep. She had flaunted them like ornaments, but they disappeared the moment the spotlight turned harsh. When the applause stops, I thought, so do the admirers. Karen stumbled back into her chair, her hands trembling. "Please," she said again, her voice breaking. "Please, give me another chance. You don't know how important this is to me." The CEO shook his head, his voice calm but absolute. "What I understand is integrity. And you've shown me enough." The silence that followed was heavy. No one moved. The only sound was Karen's uneven breathing, shallow and desperate. I felt the strange stillness of justice settling in the room. Watching her undone by her own choices was both brutal and inevitable. My mother's words returned to me again, grounding me. Dignity is not negotiable. Karen sagged forward, her body curling as though trying to shrink from sight. The woman who had strutted through airports, who had boasted of her deal like it was salvation, now sat crumbling before strangers. I rose quietly, gathering my bag. She didn't look at me, couldn't. My silence remained my shield, my choice, my statement. As I stepped out of the conference room, the hush broke into whispers that spread through the hotel corridors. Guests in the lobby leaned toward one another, murmuring. A few glanced at me as I passed, their eyes widening in recognition of the woman who had just fallen from her throne. Her downfall wasn't private anymore, it had already gone public. The room emptied as though someone had pulled the air out with the closing of that folder. Executives shuffled out quickly, whispering in low tones, their polished shoes tapping against the floor with urgency. They didn't look back, not at Karen, not at me. Mr. Redmond stood last. He didn't rush. His movements were deliberate, steady, his voice as even as before. "I'll be in touch with the legal team," he said to no one in particular. Then he nodded once in my direction, not to her, and left. Karen remained seated at the head of the table, frozen. The smile that had once been painted onto her face had collapsed, leaving behind only the hollow frame of arrogance. She blinked rapidly, her chest rising and falling shallowly, panic replacing the polish. I stayed where I was, near the wall. Silent, observing. It struck me how quickly admiration turned to avoidance. Not 5 minutes earlier, her friends had leaned forward, hanging on her every word. Now, even the memory of their applause seemed absurd. Power leaves faster than it arrives, I thought, and she was learning that lesson too late. The conference room seemed larger now, emptier. Only one chair remained at the head of the table, pulled slightly away, still waiting for someone worthy to sit in it. Mr. Redmond had paused near it earlier, his hand resting briefly on the back as though marking it, then moved on. To me, it was clear. The chair wasn't Karen's. It had never been hers. Respect belongs to substance, not showmanship. Karen turned her head slowly toward it, her eyes narrowing. For a moment, she glared at the empty chair as though it had betrayed her. She whispered hoarsely, "That should have been mine." I wanted to tell her it never was, but I didn't. My silence was sharper than words. Dignity cannot be bought, and it cannot be staged. A rustling sound broke the stillness. Karen's assistant had left in the rush, forgetting a folder on the table. Papers spilled slightly from the edge. My eyes caught the bold headings: complaints, lawsuits, background reports. I realized then what Mr. Redmond's nod in the lounge had meant. He hadn't been curious about me. He had already known. He had been confirming. Karen noticed me glancing at the file. With a burst of movement, she lunged forward, snatching it up. Her hands trembled so violently the papers rattled. "Don't look at this," she snapped, her voice cracking. Her knuckles whitened as she clutched the folder to her chest. Truth is the one file no one wants opened, I thought. And hers had just been laid bare. Karen stumbled to her feet, clutching the folder, and rushed toward the door. I followed a few paces behind, not close enough to be pulled into her storm, but near enough to watch the destruction. The lobby greeted us with the low hum of conversations, the clink of glasses, the steady shuffle of business travelers. Karen's eyes darted left and right, searching desperately for her friends. None of them were there. She yanked her phone from her bag, her fingers trembling as she scrolled. Her social media feeds were flooded, comments piling in by the second. Fraud. Cruel. Not what leadership looks like. The empire she had built online was collapsing in real time, eaten alive by the same crowd she had once charmed. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, her eyes scanning faster. "No, no, they don't understand. This isn't how it ends." A group of guests nearby glanced over, whispering. One raised his phone subtly, snapping a photo. Another leaned toward her companion, murmuring, "That's her, the one from the video." Karen's breath came faster. She spun in place, searching the lobby for anyone still loyal. There was no one. The same people who had once clapped for her were now capturing her collapse on their screens. I walked past her slowly, not cruelly, not triumphantly. Simply with finality. My inner voice was clear. Silence is my justice. She stood there, crumbling, clutching the folder like a shield that only proved her guilt. I stepped through the revolving door and into the evening air. Before leaving the sidewalk, I turned once more to glance through the glass. Karen sat in the lobby, surrounded not by fans, not by friends, but by whispers and stares. I whispered to myself, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of freedom." The morning after the collapse was strangely ordinary for the rest of the world. Yellow cabs honked their horns on the busy streets. Commuters clutched coffee cups as they hurried to offices, and shopkeepers rolled up their gates to start another day. Life pulsed with its usual rhythm, indifferent to the ruin of one woman's empire. I stood outside the hotel, the sharp wind tugging at my coat, watching headlines flicker across the newsstand screens. $15 million deal crumbles. PR queen exposed as arrogant and unfit. Karen's name was everywhere, her face caught mid-laugh in photos that now seemed grotesque. On my phone, notifications scrolled endlessly, clips of her condescending remarks, comments condemning her cruelty, strangers sharing their disgust. Life kept moving. And that was the lesson. The world doesn't stop for anyone's downfall. It just reminds you to keep walking. I breathed deeply, feeling calm clarity settle in my chest. But before I could leave, I stepped back into the hotel one last time. Karen sat slumped in the lobby, her hair unkempt, makeup smeared from tears she wouldn't admit to. She clutched her phone in both hands, scrolling feverishly through the avalanche of negative headlines. Her lips moved as she whispered to herself, eyes wild. When she noticed me, her face twisted with fury. "You ruined everything. You wanted this, didn't you?" Her voice was low but sharp, venom mixed with desperation. I walked closer, steady, my tone firm. "No, Karen. You ruined yourself. I just stopped carrying your weight," she scoffed, shaking her head violently. "You think you're better? You think standing there in silence makes you strong? You're pathetic. You've always been pathetic. I leaned slightly forward, my voice calm but unshakable. Accountability is the only cure for arrogance. You chose to humiliate others instead of honoring your own family. That was your choice. And now you're living with it. Her face crumpled. For the first time, she had no ready retort. Her friends weren't there to clap. Her entourage wasn't there to laugh on cue. There was only the weight of her own echo chamber collapsing around her. I reached into my bag and pulled out an old, crumpled boarding pass, the one from the day she told me not to walk beside her. I placed it gently on the table near her. "This was your warning," I said quietly. "You chose humiliation over family. And this is the cost." Karen's eyes locked on the slip of paper. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, the realization crashing in. That simple ticket, worthless in money but priceless in memory, symbolized the moment she pushed me away, and the moment her downfall began. I didn't wait for her reply. My silence was the final word. Turning on my heel, I walked out through the revolving doors. The sunlight hit me like a curtain rising on a new stage. The morning sun cut through the city haze, casting long beams across the busy sidewalks. I stepped into it, my breath steady, every step lighter than the last. I thought of my mother's voice, firm but gentle. "Dignity is not negotiable." And my father's silent gaze, heavy with truths he could not speak. Together, they had shaped me, and they had carried me here. "Strength is not in revenge," I whispered to myself, "but in refusing to be erased." As I walked down the street, taxis rushing by, the noise of the city alive around me, I felt no need to look back. The weight I had carried was gone. In its place was something stronger, something freer. At the corner, I paused, lifting my face toward the sky, letting the light wash over me. "This is not just survival," I said softly. "This is freedom." The camera of memory froze on that moment, me walking away, strong, unbroken, stepping into the light. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply walking away brighter than you arrived.